I went ahead and unmuted you, Hugh. When Jason shows up, I'll unmute him as well. But you're not server muted, so if you want to get rolling and start chatting, by all means, go ahead.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, I'm not sure if Jason will join, so we may as well kick off. And if he joins, he can interrupt and take over. So, hey everybody. Actually, Jason's here. Hey everybody, my name is Hugh. I'm one of the two operations leads for KlimaDAO. So howdy everyone. Jason is the other ops lead. Hey man, do you want to come off mute and kind of quickly do an intro? I think like the way we'll do this is we can essentially do like a round of intros for us too, and then we can kind of give a quick background on operations, like what we do, what we've been working on, what we're looking to work on in the months ahead, and then basically just open up for questions and yeah, that's kind of the idea. So I can quickly start with just an introduction of myself. So I come from a background of actually management consulting for like a period of time. I'm actually recovering from that, but I spent 3 years working in like a management consulting environment. I actually like originally when I was in university got involved in sustainability related startups. So one of the very first things that I did professionally was worked on a business which was doing like last mile delivery on bikes. This is actually something that's really been popping up lately, but this was about 8 or 9 years ago. And like the whole kind of business there was around essentially creating these little electric bike delivery networks and creating all the value out of almost like being an alternative to cars and whatnot. That experience kind of made me want to get into startups, as well as like very interested in sustainability. And then when I went into consulting, I kind of did that because I wanted to learn business fundamentally. And I did that for about 3 or 4 years. And then after that, I moved into a role where I was like a product manager, building startups for other companies. So that was kind of like my background. I spent 2 years doing that, and then I first got into crypto in 2017, 2018, and then more like involved in it at the beginning of 2020. And I actually during the middle of 2020 started contributing in different DAOs and getting experience there. And then in November of last year, I left my full-time job to work on KlimaDAO exclusively and like in other DAOs as well. And it's been a wild ride. So that's kind of my background. I might hand over to Jason to give a quick intro on him and his background.
Yeah, hi, can you guys hear me? So Um, okay, so hi. My background is apologies if you hear any like car noise. I'm driving. My background, I came, educationally, I was trained in chemical engineering. So a lot of my research had to do with like polymeric substances, and actually, one of the projects I was leading was sort of had like a green project where it was a particular type of polymer that could be reduced to its base monomer by like 99% with just thermal degradation, which is like pretty much unheard of. And a lot of that education was especially geared towards sort of like oil and gas industry, which I never really sort of agreed with. I think oil and gas is kind of like an archaic use of energy, and consumption, if you will. So I left that, or I didn't go into oil and gas. I actually ended up in one of the world's largest CPG companies, within sort of like a research and development position as a scientist, and then kind of floated my way into my current position, which is where I help deploy technology across the globe. Basically helping unlock millions, tens of millions of dollars in sort of net sales value across many, many different regions, wherever you are, from Latin America to Russia to Japan, China, Africa, Australia, um, wherever, right? And I got into crypto about like 2-ish years ago. Um, I actually got into the whole like GameStop thing and made a bunch of money and then lost a bunch of money and then did like some more research, and it just became, just like disgustingly apparent how like manipulated markets were. And so I was like, okay, well, I want to go to something that's like more decentralized, more open, more apparent, that's more tech focused, something that's just different. Um, which is kind of more towards like my personality in a lot of different ways. And so I started researching into sort of cryptocurrencies. And at the beginning, it was like whatever I could purchase from like Coinbase. And then eventually I took the dive into DeFi. And then I eventually ended up at Olympus, and eventually slowly started working for that DAO. And I started off there in operations. And then now I've slowly somehow just ended up doing almost everything. So I help out with like community and content, treasury management, policy, partnerships, products, especially like work streams, initiatives, like Incurred Debt and Olympus Pro, um, as well as incubator and grants, which Hugh also helps out with over there as well. And Klima kind of came from Olympus in a lot of ways. A lot of those guys were old time Omis. There's a lot of sort of like synergies between the two leadership teams in a lot of ways. So very well connected. Obviously, everyone can sit here and be like, oh, well, market sucks, blah blah blah, whatever. But at the end of the day, like regardless, they're very well connected. And Klima popped up, and I saw it as another opportunity to help a DAO. Like it's a crazy idea, but I thought, well, I love hiking, and like the carbon credit markets are shit because of various different reasons. And a more transparent one, on chain one, would be quite ambitious an endeavor, and I would love to be like to help out with that like in any way that I could. So I joined in when it was sort of like coming to light, as it was blossoming or birthing, if you will, and helping out the ops. So Hugh and I met in ops on the Olympus side of things, came over and sort of like, Olympus. The thing was, it grew really, really fast, and so they have the problem of like going back and trying to take old frameworks and mold it into something new. Whereas Klima, we could look at it and say, okay, well, what did Olympus do? Why didn't that work, and how can we scale it differently? And so that was kind of like Hugh and I's focus moving into ops. But yeah, so that's a little bit about me. I just sort of like project manager within a huge research and development department of a huge, just massive company. And like an all around just DAO contributor. I just like to call myself an individual contributor at these DAOs just because, they're meant to be very flat structures, and so I'm just a person trying to help Klima and Olympus achieve its vision and its mission and what it's trying to do. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Unless anyone has any questions on Hugh or I's sort of past or anything like that.
Cool. Well, maybe we can go to, I guess, like, I'm not sure what the format of this is necessarily. Recommend just let me know if this is wrong. But yeah, maybe we can just like kind of start with quick introduction of what we do in operations, and then we can jump to the community chat to answer any questions. So I can start and Jason just fill in where I leave gaps. But basically, like the goal of operations at KlimaDAO is to build and maintain the systems and processes that make sure that the DAO is running efficiently. This is kind of like the thing that when it works you don't notice it, but when it doesn't work you really notice it. So it's definitely like a fairly like thankless kind of thing that we do, but ultimately what we want to make sure is that when we hire in somebody to the DAO, we're bringing in a very specialist kind of technical, usually like very like a person who's got like a very particular set of skills, and we want to make sure that they're not focusing on, oh, how do I message this person in like what's the process for X, like creating this from nothing. Like we want to make sure that they're up and running and on board and working as efficiently as possible, and all of the the stuff that happens, that's all the admin stuff, like that gets taken care of for them. So yeah, that's kind of like the role of ops. We're a really, really small team actually, like probably only got 4 to 5 people. But when you kind of like normalize that to full-time equivalent, it's probably a little bit smaller. And the kind of people that are in the team have pretty similar backgrounds to Jason and myself, like people who have worked in IT or tech industry, worked in startups, worked in kind of biz ops roles or consulting roles or finance roles. That kind of like scope of what we do, from setting up the systems and processes 0 to 1, as Jason mentioned, like the experience of going through that flow with Olympus DAO, getting that rung on the board, figuring out what worked well, what didn't work well. That's been pretty helpful in just like making sure we don't repeat the same issues. But yeah, like we're obviously in uncharted territories with DAOs here. Like DAOs have a lot of issues that kind of repeat themselves, and you see it everywhere. And most of it comes down to this fact that, like, when you're in a DAO, you're essentially working with a whole bunch of independent contractors with like no hierarchy, and that creates enormous challenges when it comes to coordination. Like, for example, how do you determine like what amount somebody should get paid is like a problem that many DAOs face, and it often it's often a source of frustration and confusion. So a lot of this stuff is being kind of like the playbook, what best practice looks like, really hasn't been kind of solidified yet, and every DAO seems to do things slightly differently. So yeah, there's a lot of, I guess, like thinking through how best to do something, whether that's and that's really kind of like thinking specifically in the realm of coordination and kind of like project process and project management flows. Yeah, in addition to those systems and processes, we also kind of like manage that monthly allocation expense management process. So this bleeds in the finance side of DAOs. So how do we manage our treasury? How do we think about budgets and ultimately, like, where we are today, like I don't think it's like a surprise. Like if we with the price of basically all-time lows, we need to think very carefully about how we use our DAO treasury. So like a big piece of thinking and work that has been going on over the last couple of weeks has been, how do we ensure that the DAO is financially sustainable over a long time frame? Klima is, I think, one of those protocols that it's doing like, and this is the kind of reason I'm so interested in it as like, from an intellectual perspective, is that it's solving one of the biggest problems that humanity faces, but in a way that is so different to the way it's solved today. So in climate change, like Web 2 versions of that, there are so many stakeholders that need to come on board, from, the CEOs of companies, the boards, the different auditors, the verification agencies, blah, blah, blah. All of these different parties are essentially part of this ecosystem that we're trying to disrupt. And, one might argue that we've got heaps to work on and heaps to build, and we need to make sure that we survive long enough to actually realize those things. So, one of the KIPs that we released last week, the KIP 10, I think, was all around how do we actually reduce the or in fact kind of like build more sustainability from the perspective of paying contributors to continue to work on building these things that are essential to the success of the protocol. So that's kind of like been a big focus, and there's a whole bunch of other things that we're thinking through as well in that vein, from adjusting the comp model for contributors to kind of be more around like vested Klima, essentially reducing the like liquid allocation of Klima to contributors, basically to make it to really align incentives of the people working in the DAO to the long-term success of the DAO. So that's like, and there's a whole bunch of kind of other ideas that we have that we need to flesh out. But yeah, aside from that, like this idea of how do we ensure sustainability, it requires kind of like that finance, almost strategic finance and treasury management capability, where we're looking at treasury inflows and outflows, and then using that to inform kind of budgets, moderating how we think about recruitment across different departments, setting and managing expenses, and like we're probably the like least fun people in the room when it comes to the DAO, because everyone is hyper bullish and hyper like, yes, let's grow, and we're sort of the people in the room who have to say like, hold on guys, we need to actually think about this carefully, like how do we spend money in the most efficient way possible, because I think at the end of the day, like we're a startup with with a runway, and the reality of that means that we need to behave like a startup, and the way that startups behave is that they don't assume that they're going to succeed. They have to assume that they're, likely going to fail. So how do we like mitigate that as much as possible and ensure its success? So maybe I'll just pause there. Jason, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about on that? And there's obviously like a heap of other things that we're working on that we can also talk about.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was a really good summary of everything. It's just, basically process, platform, and people management for the most part. And we purposely kept the team quite small just because we want to grow with intent, right? We don't want to just like add a bunch of people because a bunch of people want to come in. Like you could have a DAO where it's completely open doors, but then it takes more effort to manage the inflow and to help sort of manage that many people. And then you have to remember that people want to feel like they're bringing value. And if the work is so dispersed or there's ebbs and flows, it just becomes problematic. So we purposely kept the team quite small, and just sort of like in the last couple of months, it's really been sort of like laying out policies and procedures. So what does onboarding look like? What does offboarding look like? What does compensation look like? what if there's points of contention? What are our policies with social media? What are our policies for contributor to contributor interaction? What are our policies? Like, what are our mission and vision and values? How do we implement that within the DAO structure? Things like that. So, very much more like just like the name says, operational. And we help out other departments as well. They have their own things that they need to worry about, and just making sure that Klima is sort of, as a DAO organizationally from a framework perspective, is set to scale. That's our biggest focus, because it is quite a big DAO. Like Olympus is massive, but like Klima is also fairly large, and people forget that it just started like 3 months ago. So, it's a lot of coordination, but I think, within the last month or so, things have been quite smooth in terms of like operationally, which is nice. Um, yeah, we can open it up to the floor for if anyone have any questions, like in terms of DAOs or like how we sort of approach different problems or like things like that, or even the KIP. Honestly, it doesn't, whatever you guys feel like you want to ask or understand about KlimaDAO.
I have a question from Baby Please. Do people join DAOs as full-time jobs? So this is actually something that we're seeing more of, but there are like major blockers for people wanting to do this, depending on where you live. Like I know in the US, the big kind of thing is health insurance. Like with DAOs, many don't come with health. I don't actually think there's like a DAO setup that has like offers health insurance to its contributors. So this is a major thing that I think like prevents it. But in other parts of the world, in Europe and where I'm from, in Australia, like this is becoming like a more common thing that people are actually like willing and excited to do. But when you look at the data, people actually tend to contribute in multiple DAOs. There's this great report that I can share, which looked at like a sample of like basically a survey that looked at a whole bunch of contributors. They found that on average, people contributed in about 2 to 3 DAOs. And I think like a large portion of those people will be doing that full time and splitting it across those different DAOs. So yeah, it's definitely something that's happening more. And yeah, like it's, but I still think that there are blockers, like almost like you got to think about what are those things that are stopping people. Like one of them might be health insurance. Another one might be kind of like clarity on how much money you're going to get. Again, the work of it, the way that comp works currently is that you almost like you almost get paid back retrospectively for the work that you did. So at the start of the month, you don't know what you're going to end up with. And so that's evolving, obviously, and there's a load of different things that are, experiments that are happening around kind of like setting up expectations better. But yeah, it's still an evolving space, and I think until those things can be really solved, people like some people won't want to do it, but it's definitely happening. There's another question from Earlybird. We mentioned that there's some mistakes from Olympus's growth in building out ops. I mean, like a really simple example is just the way that like we organize around projects. So I think with Olympus, when Jason and I first joined it, they're like the idea of using, because we use this platform called Notion to manage all of our projects. And Notion becomes the source of truth for any work that happens. So like, let me just explain that even better. Like we use Discord for communicating on work, but we use Notion as the source of truth for that work. So what this means is that, a thread could happen, and because like of the nature of crypto running 24/7, it can happen while you're asleep. And then instead of needing to kind of like read through this 100 comment thread, you can just like look at the source of truth and get all the context you need. That kind of process that we define around project management and then like using Notion and these different tools in a way that like minimizes that friction for somebody to get up to speed and contribute and add value as quickly as possible. That's something that wasn't in place when Olympus first started. So what we wanted to do was make sure that that was like in place from day one, and that system was like kind of almost a blocker for launching the DAO. So we wanted to like define that really 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 well, and then train everybody to do it in a specific way, so that we can just make sure that there's high impact from the outset. Any other? I'm just looking through these questions. Jason, I might ask you to, as we go through this, just like have a look and see if there's any questions. Are we dead? Definitely not. Raw dog. No, we're definitely not dead. And I think like we've just got these challenges with price at the moment, but I think like from within the DAO, the like sentiment is and the mood is incredibly focused. We're all just trying to like add value, create something that's gonna be sustainable, and just like focus on building. I think like the price, it's kind of a shitty thing with crypto where if you're a VC, if you're a venture capitalist, right, investing in a Web2 company, in a seed round or an angel round, the reality is you don't know what the price of the token is or the price of the equity you're buying is. In Web3, you do, because it's traded on a DEX. So I think like it's the sad sort of reality is like kind of what the sentiment of the market is, and it's reflected very front and center. But like if you're a seed investor, an angel investor, that's not something you experience, but it's a risk that you take on. And like that because if you are an angel investor and I go to like a friend and I say, hey, do you want to buy my seed or my angel investor equity? You're definitely not going to get the amount that you paid for it. You're probably going to get way less. So I think that's just like this thing that we've all got to kind of consider, that we're in this like artificial environment where price is kind of like surfaced, but from the inside, I can assure you that everyone is feeling like, just super focused on building and creating value.
Yeah, I see somebody here that's just saying that they're not interested in back office stuff in times like this. Yeah, like when we say KIP in terms of treasury, we mean in terms of paying contributors. So like there are two halves to the Klima treasury, and the Klima treasury is quite different than like what you would consider with Wonderland or Olympus, right? So I help manage the Olympus treasury, and we have like many different revenue streams like Olympus Pro, Incubator, as well as like just treasury assets, bonds, etc. Wonderland had just bonds and some treasury growth, but the problem with Wonderland, it was also tied to its own assets. So like, if it falls, it like really falls. With Klima, like the thing is that like the whole point of Klima is that you bond in carbon, you're doing the climate a service in terms of like removing carbon or creating demand for these assets such that it creates a price demand on the off chain. And the whole idea and concept would be, can it bring on chain demand for carbon credits today, like in Web3? And if so, if that happens, then that price appreciates. And if that price can appreciate, then Klima's price will appreciate because the LPs that Klima is associated with these specific carbon credits. And if those prices appreciate and the LP appreciates and Klima appreciates, people will look at Klima's treasury and say, oh, like, wow, this is really undervalued, right? I truly think that like before there was a really like during fork season, there was like a massive misunderstanding in terms of like what is the value of a particular cryptocurrency. So with like and like once all the forks popped up, the problem is that everyone was paying attention to APY, and they weren't really saying like, well, what can we do with this token, right? So there was this huge drive for utility. One of the biggest hurdles that we're overcoming is the utility of Klima is really through just sort of offsetting carbon in and of itself. So if you think about in the Web2 world, what does a company do with a carbon credit? They can't do anything with it. They just purchase it because they need to purchase it in order for them to be carbon neutral or carbon negative. That's it. That's all the purpose that credit serves. And that's it. And so in today's world, all those carbon credits are increasing on the off-chain world. And so now we're trying to overcome this hurdle where those assets can then that demand can become liquid between off-chain and on-chain. So the whole selling point is, can we make folks understand the value of Klima, or at the very minimum, can they look at the value of tokenized carbon credits as a way to overcome a lot of intermediaries between your typical carbon offsetting scenario and this new future of carbon offsetting, which would be more transparent, on-chain, verifiable, and easy, very smooth, where everyone's not like it's filtering off the top. So an example of that would be somebody would buy a $5 carbon credit in the Web 2 world, they might pay $20, and all that extra stuff was just people pulling off like fees and all this other stuff. So the whole idea is, can we bring that demand on chain, right? So it's very early in the space. It's even early for companies to be looking at like carbon offsetting and carbon neutral. Like as you see today, if you wake up and you see the news where people are like, oh, we're pledging to be carbon neutral by 2050. We're pledging to be this, this, and this, right? It's going to create demand. It's not an if anymore. It's more so a when, because climate change will increase. Weather will get worse. There will be more disasters. Even the U.S. government said that they've predicted that this could cost $1 billion in damages and things like that. And if people look at that and they say, okay, well, I don't want that to happen, they're going to look at the carbon credits and say, these are really expensive. Because if somebody wants to be producing tons and tons of carbon and tons of offsets, they're going to want to purchase these carbon credits. So then you'll have people that are pre-purchasing it. And there's a finite resource, right? No government's going to say like, have at it. Here's an infinite supply of carbon credits, right? So you have that, and then you create a force like Klima, where they're working with bridges like C3 and like Toucan and like Moss and other ones that are coming out to say, okay, well, how about this? We purchase it off the floor, and we'll create demand. Well, think about it like sweeping the floor of NFTs, right? Imagine you had a bunch of NFTs and there was like a price dispersion of like 1 ETH to 10 ETH. And let's say there was 25% of them around 1 ETH. Think of the carbon bridges as basically people being like, I'm just going to take all the 1 ETH ones. And then I'm going to use that, and we're going to move on from there. And then, bring that on chain. And so the whole idea is that there's this future price appreciation. The problem is that we had originally, when Klima first launched, which was good, a bunch of people bonded carbon, and it filled the treasury, because what happens with traditional Olympics mechanics is that when somebody bonds into the treasury, let's say they bond 1 Klima worth of carbon, then it's going to mint based on true Olympus like vanilla mechanics, it mints one, like, so if it's 1 ohm, it mints 1 ohm to the treasury for like to pay for contributors, to pay for liquidity initiatives, to pay for DAO to DAO swaps, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the Olympus treasury is quite full. Klima and other ones like Rome, they thought, okay, well, instead of minting one at the treasury, we'll just reduce that, and we'll be able to give higher APY to the stakers. And instead of that, we'll just do 10% of the treasury. Well, it worked originally. If Ohm doesn't work out, is there a backup plan? Well, Klima is not tied to Ohm at all. But anyway, so if like with Klima, if you mint 1 Klima, 10% of that goes to the treasury. Originally, when Klima launched, it launched exactly at $320. Bots sniped it up to 1,600. And then because there was low liquidity, but a bunch of buying pressure because it was fork like euphoria season, it went from 1,600 to 3,000, which is like way, 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 way above premium, like super above premium. It's the same thing when Ohm went to $1,400. Like it was like so far above premium what we would consider like people should be paying for it based on market value or liquid backing or whatever metric you want to use. So when people are like, oh, it's down 95%, well, it's like nobody told you to market buy at 3,000. Like we're not advertising that Klima should be worth $3,000, right? We're just advertising what the treasury's worth, and we're advertising what's the backing for Klima. And if you look at the backing for Klima, which is, I don't know, 5 to 6 to 10 BCT, then you can think, okay, well, how much is 5 to 6 to 10 BCT worth? It's definitely not worth $3,000. So a bunch of people bought it because they were looking for high APY and trying to make money, right? And then therefore it decreased. So we are a sort of like, we came in with those tailwinds, and because of that, then there was a huge pullback in particular to that. And what happened was the treasury that was to pay people which was $9 million, goes down to about $1 million. So market launched like the leverage token launch thing. That was like, we wanted to avoid that going out so early. Ohm strategy, we're going to be like thinking about moving into like a Klima V2, but it's kind of in the works in terms of what's that. Hand steer, we don't, so like you have to remember that like we at the very minimum, we don't want to sell BCT, right? Like that doesn't make sense. Because if you sell BCT, then people will sell the BCT, and therefore the backing of Klima goes even further down, right? It loses its purpose as like a currency that's supposed to consume carbon. What if we get a competitor price gauging carbon credits on chain? Price gauging. Can you define price gauging? Gouging. Got it. Like if they reduce carbon, the price of carbon, like they're like just selling a bunch of carbon. I don't know why they would. I mean, Klima's diversifying a treasury, right? So they're going to like, we're diversifying into Moss, Toucan. We have the C3 bridge coming. There's like 2 or 3 other bridges coming as well. So the idea is that it would be, yeah, like it is kind of losing money for no point. The idea is that Klima is going to be backed by multiple different currencies. So if they're selling one, then that's fine. If they're trying to sell all of them, that's like a lot of money. I don't know why they do that. Can other products sell carbon credit for cheaper? I suppose they could, but we're not selling carbon credits, right? Like we only purchase them. Like we're only consuming them. And like there's off-chain, like you have to remember there's off-chain carbon credit markets that have demand, and then there's on-chain. So Klima is kind of interesting because you have off-chain demand for these carbon credits, and you have on-chain demand. The idea though is that the on-chain demand is not equal to the off-chain. And so the true setting, like the true flexion point, will be when those two can merge, and when companies say, yes, I'll hold Klima, or yes, I'll hold Moss, or yes, I'll hold BCT. And that's the way that I will appreciate or that's the way I'll be carbon neutral or negative. And that's how, like, once that flexion point happens, then you have like this new wave of momentum that kind of picks up. Carbon removal assets, like carbon offsets. Yeah, we're in talks with some people about that sort of stuff. It becomes complicated because it depends on the type of offset and where it's from. On-chain and off-chain just means like, are you in a traditional carbon credit exchange, or are you on Polygon purchasing like a BCT?
Early bird. So, question is like, what holes are in the ops team in terms of skill set? So, like, I think we're pretty. We've got a pretty good coverage across kind of like, core business operations across, HR, finance, payroll, systems and processes. I think where it gets like, when we get breathing room and when we have like budget to actually hire more people, there's probably 2 areas that we'll want to go into. So one is like going deeper on strategic finance and like what's the like financial controllership, that kind of like core finance function of a business. So instilling kind of like good processes in that, and then being able to like publish regular reports that talk to the performance of the DAO. I think that's going to be a good one to get into. And the other area, which is not so much of a skill set gap, but it's more of a direction operations is to build better tie-ins, closer tie-ins with other departments. So, I mean, the big one is to build so we're already managing within operations the QA process for engineering. So, we've got an upcoming release that's just been put into staging this morning. So we're gonna basically run this whole QA process on that, and then as we can kind of again, once we get a bit more breathing room, we'll be getting closer to building out more of a product function where we're sort of interfacing with design and engineering and users. So that's going to come with maturity and time. But we're in a pretty good spot to be able to at least do 0 to 1 set up for a lot of these things. There was a question earlier I saw about I can't see it now. But yeah, it was the difference between the sort of treasury performance and the DAO performance. Sorry, it was basically a question around how do we look at KIP10 from the perspective of how much money we've got in the DAO treasury. So essentially, think of it like if you have systems thinking mindset here, you've got inputs and outputs. The inputs into the DAO treasury are minted Klima from bonding. Currently, we take before KIP10 we took 10%, but now it's after the after that was approved, now it's going to be up to 30%. So for every bond that we come in, we mint now 30% of the bond value into Klima, that goes into the DAO treasury to fund it. The outflows that we have from it, though, are the monthly allocation. So the monthly allocations are themselves a function of the dollar figure that we pay contributors as a policy across the DAO, and then the price per Klima at the time that we're making those payouts. So essentially the cheaper the price of the token, the more Klima that we need to part with for payroll. Obviously, this isn't ideal. We want to be in a spot where we can have a diversified treasury where we might actually have a USDC component to the salary, and then supplement that with a vested schedule of Klima. But again, that's going to be something that will come with time, and I think we need to work on thinking through that treasury function and then what that looks like to make sure that we're not burning through Klima faster than we need to. But yeah, at the moment, where we have in terms of the inflows and outflows, we're in a sustainable spot, but we just need to monitor it to make sure that we're not burning into our runway. Hopefully that answered the question there.
Yeah, one asked about if Klima went to 1 VCT, what would we do? I know that there's people in the DAO that would honestly work for free, just because they want the DAO to succeed. I would be open to that. Obviously, I like working for DAOs, for payment and stuff like that. But honestly, if I could devote some of my time to Klima, that would be fantastic. Is Vera controversial? So if you go see the recent proposal by C3, that's a pretty big deal. There is some talks and things in the work in terms of Vera about what is considered retired offsets. The statement that Vera made was more so around the legality of what people can claim or not claim, but they're we're super tight and close to Vera. It's more so just a legal disclaimer or thing that they said. It's not necessarily controversy or FUD. So for payments, it would be vested Klima. In terms of considering the protocol and stuff like that, all I know is that there's a V2 version that people are thinking about. I know it's kind of under wraps, so I can't really say too much like that. But the idea would be more utility for Klima. The idea would be more companies holding Klima to become carbon negative or carbon neutral, things like that. Those are things that the whole idea. Like if you look at like Ohm and Olympus, right? Ohm, you want utility and you want people to hold it because it's to act as like the reserve currency. It's kind of a similar concept with Klima, where you want people to hold Klima because therefore they are forever carbon neutral or carbon negative. So it's kind of a similar concept, right? So the best way that the DAO can sort of ensure success of Klima is to ensure like why would people hold Klima? Like, what's the purpose of it, right? And that's like partially the narrative, that's partially utility, that's partially sort of like Klima Infinity will help with this. Like, how can I determine I'm carbon negative or carbon neutral? It's the same way that you like if you created in Web 2 a carbon credit asset, we're like, okay, well, what's the point of this thing? And if the government comes to you and says, you need to have this in order for you to actually produce carbon tonnage, then you're like, okay, well, I guess I have to buy carbon credits. And then you create multiple markets such that you can do arbitrage and things like that. Well, now you have this grotesque sort of incumbent system that's been sort of like abused and exploited. And so, like Klima is saying, how about this? We build an on-chain market, right? And well, I'll be the market maker, and I'll be the center of liquidity for all these different these assets. And that's essentially what Klima is doing, right? Like we don't have a DEX yet, but like it's eventually I would assume that like eventually we're going to have a DEX that's basically like carbon credits. Like that's the future, right? Where you have like a new carbon exchange, carbon credit like market on chain that's verifiable and transparent and anyone can use it. Companies can come and purchase credits and purchase Klima as an index, if you will, and Klima would be essentially the thorough way for all these assets to go through. And the idea would be like, boom, you have now like companies no longer have to worry about these like old incumbent systems that come on chain, right? That's the future. That's like the ultimate vision, right? And so like Klima's just sort of perfectly positioning itself to gain from that. But it's not going to happen overnight, right? Like you're trying to change systems that are very, very old and work with people who are incumbent, right? That have been around for a while. And it's not an easy thing to do, right? So somebody asked why we chose Harmony over Polygon. Polygon just has a better network effect than Harmony. Like there's just more protocols that we're closer with. It's easier to interact, things like that. Buybacks don't really work, right? So like if you buy back, then you're just sort of selling the treasury and burning the asset. Doesn't really make sense. So that's why like if you saw like all the like what Wonderland was trying to do, right? Oh, we'll let you rage quit, but then you saw whales arbing and you got the whole community up in arms. It's just not like an effective strategy. It actually doesn't really help the protocol overall. Comfy.money. What the pegged to... No, we don't want to be pegged to BCT. We would want to be like it is one Klima is always guaranteed to be one BCT, but you want it to trade over premium because it's a basket of assets. It represents the carbon market on chain, not just BCT. If that makes sense. So it should never be pegged to anything. And then the other thing about buybacks, right, is that people will use it for exit liquidity. So if you say, oh, the price floor is $20, well, then people are going to test that. And then before you know it, then like the protocol is truly dead. It doesn't help and it doesn't make sense. And even if you do buyback and burns, like trust me, it doesn't work. Thank you, Wayne Gang. Yeah, I would hardly call Wonderland stabilized, but that's like that's up to you.
I heard Jason really likes Wonderland. My I'll take it.
Yeah, let's not bring up Wonderland anymore. It's always going to be backed by the cheapest. No. So in the future, like Klima will have like Klima is also backed by Moss right now, which is a very high quality carbon credit. C3 is like a direct association with like the um, what am I trying to say? One of the biggest carbon exchange in Europe. And so there's going to be different types of carbon credits that come from that. You have like 2 or 3 other bridges that are coming that are higher quality carbon credits. There's also a different type of project that we're in talks with that is like such high carbon credit quality that they literally have to go to companies like Apple and say, can you purchase this carbon credit for this amount? It's very, very hard to get that carbon credit. So it just becomes like, um, it just becomes an interesting conversation. But no, eventually you'll want to move away from like Klima. It won't always necessarily be minted against BCTs, right? Like eventually Klima will move from like, oh, Klima is backed by BCTs to Klima is backed by a basket of climate based assets. And so you can create kind of like an index adjusted like RFV, if you will, that you can mint Klima against. It really depends on how you want to do the math, right? But no, like Klima will not always be like the cheapest type of offset. It depends on where the carbon comes from and the type of offset.
Yeah, it's like, for example, the like typically the most valuable projects are the ones where they're nature based. So they're like reforestation, some sort of like thing that a project that would not have happened. Whereas a really cheap project might be one where the financial incentive for doing the good thing isn't that great, right? So like an example that would be hydroelectric dams, or like creating solar installations. Like that's almost parity with what you could produce electricity for in other ways. So the value of offsets that you create off that are very low. But yeah, when you have things that are completely incremental and actually valuable like that, that's where you get companies, the Fortune 500 companies going and scouring and finding these very valuable projects. Obviously buying them through brokers and stuff, and then using them. So that's where this like idea of value comes from, and how there's a difference between like one carbon offset and another. And also,
I'd also like to point out, like with we're not really like, it is always better for Klima from the sense of like a sell-off remediation. Sell-off remediation. Well, there's reverse levers, right? Like that's something that we've already put up and talked about. But I think like the biggest thing that like it's more important for Klima's price to stabilize rather than moon. It's the same thing with Ohm. Like people truly don't understand it. Like they think, oh, like it should be worth $2,000 or $10,000 eventually, and it's like maybe in like 2 to 5 years. It was never intended to be that. Like I always found it funny because like with like Zeus, who created the mechanics around Olympus, he always assumed that Ohm would be worth $45. He did like hundreds of models, and the most ideal model was Ohm was worth $45. And then it moonshot it to 1400 and then went way back down. And then people are like, oh, well, you're dead now. And it's like, no, we're still fine. And it's more important. And even when I have discussions in Ohm, and it's the same discussions that happen in Klima, it's more important for there to be price stability rather than like up only. It should be stable above all else, because when you have a stable price and you have a slow build, you can do more interesting things with like bond capacity and understanding like what is the sell pressure on the token with bonds, how can we sort of remediate that with like reserve bonds versus LPs, things like that. So it's like you have to really consider it. It's not a simple decision, and each sort of discussion is very, very fleshed out before anything happens. 4 to 6 years, 2000. Honestly, if climate change continues to get much worse, it would not be surprising carbon credits become very expensive, and then the idea would be that the on-chain carbon credits would become expensive, and then yeah, and then that should sort of get the ball rolling. We are considering that Horomani, actually, but we need more Klima out there, right? You don't want to fragment the liquidity too much. It's never to do nothing. It's always to do reverse levers. Like that would be the max. Like there's other things that we can do, but like the first and foremost thing should be reverse levers. Doing buybacks and rage quits is not the way, economically speaking, to help a token price. It's just not based on market psychology. It just won't work. If climate change gets solved, we'll all be very happy people.
Oh my god, that would be the best.
Yeah.
We will hang up our boots and go home.
Yeah. Yeah, we would just call it a day at that point. What concrete price level do you consider stable? I didn't say the price was stable. If you have like a lot of like issues, you can hop on the voice chat and we can chat it out if you'd like. Reducing bond capacity can help with sell pressure. Yes, we've considered that. Yeah, companies do that all the time. Companies pre-purchase a lot of credits. It's a thing for sure. They'll go ahead and purchase like 3 to 5 years out because that way they know that the price is going to go up and they'd rather buy it at the other end.
Yeah, and you're seeing like massive amounts of land purchases now from wealthy individuals and big funds because they know that like at the sort of like top of the funnel you need to own land to actually implement some of these projects. So getting ahead, owning the land basically provides them monopoly on the production of these offsets in the future. So that's like we're seeing that already.
Yeah, no, we're not super concerned with market share, honestly. Like Klima is very, very far ahead, and we have a bunch of partnerships in the works. And the ones that are not focusing on carbon credits, we hope we want them to do well because anything to help the planet is good. But the first mover advantage is very powerful within cryptocurrency, and we have like 15 million tons of like that's it, like people truly forget how much like carbon that is. It's like insane. It's insane. The source of the difference of on-chain versus off-chain is when you purchase off-chain and you bring it on-chain, the on-chain price demand is separate than a carbon market. So like an example of that would be if you bought an orange within the US and then flew to China and then tried to sell that orange in the Chinese market, it would be priced differently, right? Because oranges are priced different. Like you don't have a standard orange price everywhere. Oranges are worth various different things in various different countries. It's the same thing with on-chain versus off-chain carbon. You have a fragmentation of demand and a fragmentation of markets. I'm ready for the next FUD talk from Pontalog. How can I get involved with marketing? I don't want to be hired into that with the user for user-generated marketing. Yeah, I mean, we're thinking about doing like bounties worth. I think, we're taking month by month to look at sort of like how much claimer we have to compensate people. What does that look like? So the best thing I can say is just apply and sort of show what you have to do, or even offer in a Sprouts channel to do some volunteer stuff would be fantastic. Lee and Tari is the lead over there. That would be great. How and when or on what triggers concrete you deploy reverse levers? I believe it's the true backing of Klima, like with carbon credits. I'm not sure what the exact price is. That would be the first thing. And then, like, in an apocalyptic scenario, let's suppose everyone's sold, which is not true because Olympus will never sell. Olympus has like 100,000 Klima or something like that. But if everyone like sold, for example, like it would kick in where Klima would basically would use the treasury to buy one Klima and burn it, and then it would then like run through that treasury, which would actually become insane. Like those who have like who stay, you would be dismissive on FUD talk. What are legitimate questions? Well, legitimate questions can also have fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? So like what you have is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So I think like I've been answering your questions, and it just seems that you don't want to take them. It's not satisfying enough to you. So don't remember. Then there's availability. Reverse levers. I think there was a proposal on that. There was. I could be wrong, but I think there was. Des 4i is correct. You increase demand. Like basically, we want people to hold Klima, right? I don't envision Klima Infinity to be like a huge like an immediate price pump. I think it's going to be like a network effect. Like the more people that accept Klima as a way to be carbon neutral and carbon negative, then you create demand, then you create legitimacy. And if you can create like legitimacy with Klima, then you're talking, right? Like there's a flexion point of acceptance of Klima.
Yeah, it's gonna be slow, but it's gonna be impactful because it really demonstrates why carbon on chain is valuable. It's like it's almost like the demonstration to any company that's looking at how do they like show off their commitment to climate change, and then like communicate that very clearly to people like customers, shareholders, blah blah blah, in a way that is simple to do because we're basically custodying the carbon. So there's like massive opportunity, but with anything like this, it's going to be a matter of hitting kind of like a growth trajectory here. So that's going to take time.
Yeah, some people, Pygmy King, I would say some people are very accepting of it and they get it, and some people don't get it quite as much. We have to kind of show them why and how, what that looks like. The biggest obstacle is always Web3, right? Like, how does this equal carbon offsetting? And we have something that's actually in the works for that. Klima Infinity is one thing, but you can actually verify it on chain, which is another thing, which is awesome. Consultants for DAOs, kind of, sort of. Not really. I mean, like you said, like we're all kind of consultants.
Yeah, there's some Bankless has a consulting kind of thing. Actually, there's a whole like range of DAOs that aggregate talent from particular kind of skills. So you would have like a designer UX DAO where folks go there and who are looking for designers, and then they pitch like the project, and then people in the DAO kind of respond with like, oh, I will, I can do this for this much, blah blah blah. That's definitely like a model that's emerging. But my recommendation would be to just take the leap, my friend. Yeah.
Yeah, Mister's right. All right. So if there's no more questions for Hugh and I, we can, we've been on for about an hour now. I hope that we've addressed kind of concerns and comments. And I know this kind of veered away from operations a little bit, but market sentiment is interesting right now. So we hope that you guys stay, that you understand that the DAO is still working, still flourishing, still sort of growing, and like nobody's really concerned within the DAO. It's more so around like, okay, how can we bring demand, and how can we make it better, and how can we focus on this, and this. It's more so like heads down and just keep focusing, right? So yeah. Q, do you have any kind of closing remarks?
No, that was great. It's good to connect more with the community, and we're going to try and do this a lot more over the coming months, and just be way more transparent about how everything is going in the DAO. But we're looking forward to kind of continuing to share progress on that front. Yeah, hope everyone's doing well. Cool. Thanks, everybody. I shall speak to everyone soon, I'm sure. Take care.
See you guys.